Welcome to 1000 Ways to Lead podcast. I am Taiwo Olawehinmi. Today's episode explores a theme that shows up again and again in real leadership, the idea of uncomfortable experiences. Yes, the setbacks, the pivots, the moments of uncertainty, and how these moments become moments of growth and new opportunities. Our guest for today is someone who has lived that truth. Mike Sumida, an Owen Executive MBA alum, is someone whose career experiences reflect this. His career journey from an aspiring physician to a high school math teacher to a career in healthcare and consulting, and now building in the world of startup, shows us a lot of promise and a lot of inspiration. Mike grew up in Hawaii, where his vision to become a primary care physician was inspired by a family doctor who treated 5 generations of his family. Even though medicine didn't become his eventual path, the desire to make a meaningful difference in the lives of people never left. Along the way, he learned the power of mentorship, the importance of listening, and how strong relationships can shape the direction of one's life positively. His story, his journey is rich in resilience and reinvention. So if you're navigating an uncertainty or a surprising career pivot, this episode will resonate deeply with you. Enjoy. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Taiwo.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Mike, I know that you have come a long way definitely in your career, and I'm curious to know, if one asks you today, Mike, what do you do? What would be your response to that?
Right now, I am, like you said, in the startup world, building a company, which has afforded me the opportunity to really bring together all of my past experience. You know, just having that diverse background, having worked in different industries with different sized companies, all of that is coming to bear in my current role, which has been a great experience for me personally and professionally.
Amazing. I know that you once imagined yourself as a primary care physician in Hawaii. You mentioned that you were inspired by a family physician who treated 5 generations of your family. And I wonder, along your career journey, when medical school stopped being the dream, what was happening internally for you? How did you process that feeling of, okay, now what? How do we move from here?
Yeah, at that time, I was right out of undergrad, feeling pretty confident of myself, right? Young, inexperienced, immature. And I had a decent MCAT score. So I honestly just thought, I would bide my time, take some graduate classes, maybe do some volunteer work and reapply. And so it wasn't really sort of a no in my mind at the time. It was more of a not yet. So I took some steps to move in that direction. But as I sort of left that industry and left that path, I really began to question if that was really what I wanted anyway, just because by then, a lot of my friends were getting into medical school. I was seeing the crazy schedules that they were keeping, and I just began to question if that was something that I really wanted for myself. And so, it was, at the time, I was just kind of a little ambivalent. I wasn't really stressed out about it, but at the same time, it wasn't something that kind of forced me to kind of reevaluate what it is that I want to do and what I want to be when I grow up.
And that's really important, I would say. I mean, as humans, we're social beings and we tend to compare ourselves with others, our friends, our peers. And it's such a powerful tool to be able to take a pause and reevaluate one's life choices, one's career choices, and determine whether that's really what one wants for oneself. And what would you say has helped you to come to that point of internal navigation, I would say, or internal balance, to take a pause and reevaluate your choices to be sure that you're doing what exactly you wish and want for yourself?
As an undergrad and shortly thereafter, being single and things like that, your perspective is a little different, right? And now that I'm married and have kids, that changes things. That changes the way that I view the world. That changes the way that I make decisions. Because now I'm not just making decisions for myself. I'm making decisions for my family and thinking about how it'll impact them and thinking about my kids' own growth and development and opportunities. And so it's a lot less complicated when you're single, but there are a lot more factors to consider, I guess, when you know, have a family, when you're quote unquote adulting, right? And so now, you know, I think I have a much different perspective than I did back then.
I see. You shifted from that big dream of becoming a physician to high school math teaching. Who does that, Mike? What did that experience teach you? What did being in the classroom teach you about leadership, about patience, about communication? I mean, lessons that you actually still use till this day.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it kind of just happened. You know, after I graduated from undergrad, didn't get into medical school, the high school that I went to called and said, hey, we have a teacher going on maternity leave. We need a long-term substitute just for a semester. Would you be interested? It's like, sure, I wasn't, you know, didn't have any real commitments or career plans at that point, right? Things were just kind of up in the air. So I figured, why not? That one semester turned into 5 years as a math teacher. And, you know, one of the things that I used to tell my students is my job, my goal is really to prepare you for life and what lies beyond the walls of this classroom. If you happen to learn some math along the way, that's just a bonus, right? And so, you know, to me, it's about maintaining that perspective. Like the thing that you might be in or working on or working through, it's probably not the most important thing, right? And so find what it really matters and focus on that. You know, when I was teaching math, I knew realistically that not all my students would go into a STEM career. Some of them did. Some of them went on to engineering, and, you know, some of them actually became math teachers themselves, but most of them did not. And so just keeping that perspective in the classroom, I think, helped me connect with the students on a more personal level. And that's something that I absolutely carry forward today. You know, that just because I think something is important, or just because I think a particular task is important, doesn't mean the other person shares that same thought, feeling, and whatever. So having sort of that broader perspective, I think, is healthy and important.
So good. And I do admire the fact that you took a step beyond classroom math teaching with your students at the time, because your goal was largely to shape your perspective. And I believe that the power of perspective is important, especially when navigating life's challenges. And your journey has not been without challenges. You went through layoffs in 2 years, twice, including 2 weeks after graduating from the MBA program, the MBA program at Owen. I'm sure that it wasn't a fun experience. And I wonder what was going through your mind during those periods of difficulty. How did those seasons really shape your sense of stability and your sense of identity?
Yeah, you know, prior to that, I would say my career was on a pretty linear upward trajectory, right? Like, you know, I was getting promoted, I was working my way up, people were recognizing, you know, the contributions that I was making to the organization. I was doing well. And then all of a sudden this happens, right? And I wasn't prepared. And I remember thinking to myself, like, you know, it wasn't supposed to happen this way, right? This is how I envisioned like my post MBA experience to be. And I got frustrated, honestly. It was a frustrating time, you know, because things did not work the way that I thought they should, right? And so this one, I think, affected me much more than, you know, not getting into medical school, because it was all of a sudden now I have a family, and it was, again, that whole, my perspective changed, right? Honestly, like during that time, you know, leaned heavily on faith and family. I realized that my career, my job, it doesn't define who I am. And, you know, at the same time, uncertainty creates opportunity, right? So it makes you see things that you probably would not have seen otherwise. And so for me personally, make me realize that sometimes, you know, I have to raise my hand and ask for help, you know, and that's one of the things that really kind of came out of that experience for me.
Amazing. Uncertainty creates opportunities. So good. Power of perspective. I'm learning a lot here. Thanks, Mike. You mentioned that you learn being a good leader involves knowing when and how to ask for help. And that's so profound, Mike. Not many leaders are humble enough to know that, to know when to ask for help, to know how to ask for help, and to actually do the asking for help. And can you share with me a moment that you had to practice that art of asking for help, even when it felt uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of practice when I was unemployed, right? You get a lot of practice asking for help when you're looking for a job. But one of the things that I learned through that experience is that how you ask is really important, because, if I just said, please help me find a job, it's not very specific, and it makes it really hard for the person that I'm talking to really help me. But if I frame the question as, hey, I really would like an introduction to X person at Y company because I saw they have a job posting for Z, right? Whatever it is. And being very specific about what you need, it makes it a lot easier for them to help them. It's almost like you're empowering them to help you, right? Because, if you just say, I need a job, like, well, what kind of company, what industry, what kind of job, right? And people are busy, right? So if you don't frame your ask in a very specific way, it makes it really hard for them to know what to do. But if you can articulate exactly what it is that you're looking for, then it makes it a lot easier and people are much more willing to assist. And that's one thing I learned through that whole experience is I think I counted like 200 networking, like coffee, lunch, phone calls, whatever, in those two periods of unemployment. And one thing I've noticed is that when I have a specific ask, it leads to action, right? As opposed to something that's more, ambiguous. It makes it really hard for someone to know what to do, right? And so, and it almost feels like you're wasting their time, right? But if you come with a very, very well framed what it is that you need, they are much more willing, I think, and able to help. And so that's what I learned through that experience is that if you do need to ask for help, when you do need to ask for help, make sure that you articulate your ask in a very clear, concise, coherent way.
So true. Being specific is so important. And like you said, it empowers the helper because they know exactly what you need. They know where your head is at and can provide support at that point in time because of clarity in your ask. So good. And I think it's also a journey because we learn by doing. As you keep asking, you get better with being able to articulate what your needs are or what your wishes are. So good. In leadership, we find that many leaders have the pressure to seem to have everything put together. How did you unlearn that in your own journey? How did you learn to replace it with something that is healthier for you, especially like asking for help and showing that, you don't have everything put together?
Yeah. When I think about the mentors who have been most impactful on my life and my journey, the thing that they did well is they listened first, they asked questions, they sought to understand before offering an opinion, right? And I try to be intentional about that when I work with my direct reports, rather than say, this is what we need to do, let them have a space to process and let them have a space to voice their opinion. As leaders, we should value diversity of thought, right? We should encourage the people around us, especially the ones that have a different personality or a different perspective or a different background than we do. We should encourage them to have a voice. We should encourage that a little bit of healthy conflict and dissent, really, to, I believe, get to find a better end product, right? Like I always feel that I do my best work when I'm surrounded by people that are not like I am and that have a different perspective than I do. I am very quantitative by background, and I know that about myself. I am not an empathetic person, right? And so that is something that I know is a blind spot for me sometimes. And so having somebody with that different perspective really helps. But if you as a leader come in and just say, this is how it's going to be, you miss that opportunity to hear those other voices. And so for me, it's really just about being intentional about listening first, understanding what the other person is trying to say, where they're coming from, and why they're saying what they're saying, right? And the ultimate goal would be to have a better end product all the way around that nobody could have come up with on their own.
So good. Being intentional about listening first. And I do like that you also referred to some of your mentors. How has mentorship shaped you? I know that there's a lot of talk about mentorship and very little effective mentorship. In answering that question about how mentorship has shaped you, I'd like you to also touch on how proactive steps that you have taken to ensure that you can get value from the mentorship experience.
Yeah, there are a couple of people in my career that have really been instrumental in shaping who I am, and they all approached leadership with a lot of questions, right? They didn't say, this is what we need to do. Well, sometimes they did, but most of the time it was, what do you think we should do? Why do you think we should do that? What other options have you considered, right? And that sort of line of questioning helped me develop as a person, as a professional, because it forced me to have an opinion. It forced me to think about the implications of the decision that we're making, right? And so it wasn't like they were interrogating me. They were really just trying to get me to think through a process, I think. And that is something that I have carried forward, in the way that I lead teams now. It's not that sometimes you absolutely have to give a directive, but most of the time you probably, there's probably some room for discussion, dissent, right? And I think, for me, I'm glad that those mentors drew that out of me. And I'm glad that they, gave me an opportunity to grow in that way. And that's just something that I try to emulate now with the people that report to me.
So good. Thanks for sharing. As a leader, how do you balance giving people grace while also demanding the best of them? During our meet and greet chat, you mentioned how you rely heavily on situational leadership and managing one skill per task and not their entire identity. How does that principle help you to effectively get the best of your teammates or your subordinates without making them complacent?
Yeah, one of the things that I think a lot of companies do is they tend to promote strong individual contributors to managers, right? Because the thought is, if you can do a task well, then you can lead or manage or direct somebody else to do that same task well. But what they fail to recognize is that doing the task and managing somebody else in that task are completely different skills, right? And so that's one of the things I learned from situational leadership is that we need to give people tools to be successful in their role and not assume that just because they do it well, that they'll lead somebody else well. And so for me, it's, sometimes you have to be, like I said, you have to be directive and you have to be very specific about what you expect the person to do. But sometimes, you have a high performer that's very motivated. They're highly skilled. You just got to get out of the way, right? And let them go. And in a situation like that, if you were coming down on them and being directive, they would potentially see it as being micromanaged, right? And it would not be a good situation for them. Conversely, if somebody is not very motivated and they're not very skilled in a particular task, if you just let them go, then they will not be effective in that role and they will maybe even hold the team back, right? And so for me, it's about figuring out quickly where that person is in terms of their skill level and their motivation level and addressing that with my leadership style, whether that's more directive or more coaching or really just empowering, right? And so that's kind of the approach that I take when I manage teams. It's think about each person's motivation and ability and adapting my leadership style to where they are in that particular task.
So good. Mike, something interesting I identified when we got speaking was the fact that you are a relationship person. Beyond leveraging that strategy you just mentioned with managing your team and building a relationship with them, you also build relationship with others across the board, and that has served you well in your own career. Almost every major role you've had came through a relationship. What's the secret? What's the philosophy on building and sustaining those value-adding connections?
Yeah, after we spoke initially, I went back and I looked through my resume and there's literally only one job that I've ever had that was a random application to a company. every single other role that I've had up until this current one has been through a prior relationship or someone in my network. And so, yes, it's, when I was at Owen, the career management people said 80 or 85% of roles come through someone in your network or something like that. I think it was a statistic that they threw out. And that's played out pretty, true in my experience, at least. But getting back to your question, I think you need to be intentional about it, right? Like maintaining those relationships, it requires work. It takes effort, right? I was having coffee with one of my mentors a week ago, and we were both saying how, we're both very busy. There's a lot to do. There's a lot on our plates. Our schedules are pretty full, but we intentionally make time to get together as often as we can. It's usually about, 2 or 3 times a year, but setting aside that time, setting aside, an hour to have coffee or to get on a call with someone, it needs to be a priority in your schedule, in your time. You need to carve out time to do that, right? And so for me, it was really about investing in those relationships when you don't need them, if that makes sense. Because when the time comes, right, like I didn't want to be the guy that was always reaching out whenever I needed a job. And so when things are going well, when, they take the time to nurture those relationships and reach out to the people that are in your network, and make it a priority. And that's even now, I still do that. I try to make sure that I set aside time to network. I set aside time to get together with people. And if it's just coffee or lunch or whatever, because it's important.
So true. Intentionality in building those relationships, as simple as setting out time on your calendar, is definitely important. And it's important to invest in those relationships when you do not really need them, so that when you do need them, you'll find something to fall back on. So important. And building upon this conversation around investing in relationships, something that you seem to do very well is organizing lunches with Owen alums. Tell us more about that.
It's funny because I'm introverted by nature, right? So it's not my nature to do these like networking things. It again takes work for me because it's not who I am, right? It's not a natural part of my personality. And so doing these things has been kind of organic. It started because somebody else thought there was value in Owen alum getting together and they couldn't do it anymore. So I picked it up. It's because I believe that there's value there. And so that's why I, think it's important. When I was interviewing for the EMBA program, Julie Bennett, I remember telling me, there's value in the Owen alumni network. And at the time I didn't really understand or appreciate what she meant. But as I've graduated from the program and now have made a lot of contacts within the Owen network, it absolutely proves true. And it's 100% true. There is significant value in the Owen alumni network. And that's been one of the greatest things for me personally, is getting to know other alum and hearing about their experiences and hearing about their journeys. And yeah, that's the reason why I do it. It's because to me, it's valuable, right? And so I'm going to do what I can to keep that going.
So good. So good. And one way that you keep that going is that you have come back to contribute towards the EMBA program itself. You mentioned that you're overseeing the capstone for the current cohort of EMBA students. What's that like, coming from your classroom experience as a high school teacher, and now you're back in the classroom supporting future business leaders? How does that make you feel? And what does this experience of giving back to the Owen community mean for you?
That was not on my radar at all until about 2 months ago. But I am really looking forward to being back in the classroom. It's something that I definitely miss doing. I miss pouring into others, helping others be successful, helping others, in the next step in the journey professionally. And so having that opportunity to do that I'm really excited about it. It's something that I'm really looking forward to. I kind of said this earlier, but when you think about all of these things that I've been involved with and that have come full circle, it's easy to give back and it's easy to do good when things are going well, right? And so it's like, there's almost like this snowball or flywheel or whatever you want to call it kind of effect where things just kind of grow, right? But in order to do that, it takes a little bit of effort. And so, that's I guess the take home message for me personally. It's that if it's important, invest in it and watch it grow.
If it's important, invest in it and watch it grow. So good. Thanks, Mike. I'm curious to know if your leadership journey so far were a book, what would the title be? How would you title your leadership journey so far?
Are we there yet?
Yes.
On a more serious note, if it's meant to be, it'll be.
If it's meant to be, it will be. That speaks to me of someone who takes solace in the presence of the journey. You are not in a haste. You're taking a step at a time, so to speak. Is that right?
Yeah, and it is about the journey, right? And not necessarily the destination. And I think if we lose sight of the opportunities that are right in front of us, we'll get to the end and be very disappointed. That's my personal take on things, right? And so, yes, sometimes, you have to go through things that are uncomfortable, but it's in those uncomfortable situations that you grow, right? I mean, think about people that do personal health journey, right? Getting exercise at the very beginning of that journey is very uncomfortable, but it gets better, right? And you build muscle and you build, stamina, right? And it's no different in a career where, it's not always going to be smooth sailing. And if it were, then you don't have those development opportunities that come with those shocks to the system, right? And so I think, just having that perspective, right, that, things do happen and you may not be able to control them. You may not be able to fix your current situation, but you can absolutely decide how you're going to respond to it and what you're going to take away from it. And so that to me is really what it's about. It's, having, not a fatalistic view of things, but just that realizing that everything does have a purpose.
True, true. Everything does have a purpose. Even the periods of uncertainty and the periods of layoffs, everything does have a purpose. Tell me, Mike, what's one lesson that you're actively learning in your journey so far, especially as you move from industry to industry?
I'm a big Star Wars fan. Grew up watching the Star Wars movies. And they talk about balance to the Force. There must be balance in the Force. And that's one of the things that I'm learning, right? It's that, where's that line where it's good enough? At what point do you start to have diminishing returns, right? We as leaders need to act decisively and swiftly, but not recklessly, right? And so where's that balance between, going too quickly or not quickly enough? With AI, the landscape is changing so rapidly. Things are evolving so quickly that our windows of opportunity are getting smaller faster than they ever have, right? And so there needs to be expediency. There needs to be, decisiveness. But at the same time, don't just go out there and be reckless. I think there needs to be a balance to everything. And that's one of the things I'm learning. Again, as someone who's very quantitative, I like to have all the data before I make a decision, right? But at a certain point, whether you have 90% or 95% of the information doesn't really matter. Right? The decision is going to be the same, right? And so where is that point where you have enough information to move, and figuring that out? That's the part that I'm learning, I'm working on right now actively, personally, is figuring out where that line is.
Great. You have done a lot of work in healthcare, from Ankura and now your current startup. Tell us about what you're doing in healthcare. And really tell us also, what changes do you think leadership in healthcare need to begin to explore in order to truly deliver value for the patient in the long run?
The healthcare industry is so complex, right? There are so many nuances. And one of the things that I'm seeing kind of out in the market is there's a lot of people building AI tools for healthcare, right? They're trying to get on that bandwagon. And a lot of them are struggling because they don't understand all the complexities of the industry. And so it's almost like they have a solution for a problem that doesn't exist, And so for those that are in leadership roles, for those that are thinking about this in terms of how to, quote unquote, fix the system, it really, I think, comes down to a misalignment of incentives, right? Like, we need to rethink how we are incentivizing physicians to deliver care, patients to self-manage, right? The system as it is lends itself to the when you think about like the historic reimbursement models, right? The fee for service models, it encourages the treatment of symptoms, not the addressing root causes. And so that needs to change, right? And these tools, platforms, systems, technology, whatever you want to call it, that people are building are a lot like that. They're treating symptoms, they're not addressing root causes. And so I think, for healthcare to really, I guess, turn the corner and head in the right direction, there are some fundamental things that need to change first. But I think there are, the current landscape has a lot of opportunity for improvement, but it'll only be incremental improvements, right? And that's kind of the space that we're playing in right now, just because there's an immediate sort of opportunity. But to really fix the system, I think it's going to be a much more complicated and involved long-term solution, answer, whatever you want to call it.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. As we wrap up, tell me, what's one thing that you want emerging leaders, especially those in seasons of uncertainty, to remember?
Yeah, I think there's like the saying, right? This too shall pass. And, for better or for worse, nothing is forever. Things are going well, that's not forever. Things are going poorly, that's not forever either, right? And so, maintaining that perspective on things, I think, is important. And then, what can you get out of your current situation from a learning perspective, I think, is also healthy. Thinking about the time when I was looking for a job and asking for help, that was the learning experience for that particular period of my life. Kind of in that same vein, like knowing what you can change and what you can't, and focusing on the things that you do have the ability to alter or to do something about, and focusing on what matters, as opposed to feeling like you're a victim of your circumstance, or feeling like, nothing is going right, or trying to change the things that you have no control over. Those are the kinds of things that I would tell someone. It's that, just think about what really matters to you, what is within your control, and what can you get out of this experience, and turn it into something positive.
So good. I will ask you a few less serious questions just to get to know you better. Tell me, are you the ebook kind of person, or would you prefer the hard copy?
So, I used to be a hard copy person. I like thumbing through the pages of a book, but for my current role, I've had to read a lot of books. It just became too cumbersome to carry around. So now I'm doing the Kindle thing, but it is nice to be able to highlight in like the Kindle app and, find where you've annotated. So that has been nice. But if I'm reading for pleasure, I still do like a hard copy book.
Cool. Are you reading any book currently?
Actually, I have this book right here. In my current company, we're using Traction. It's called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's basically a framework, and that's how we're running our business. The author of this book wrote another book, kind of a companion, called Rocket Fuel. So that's actually the one I'm reading now. I read this one a couple months ago, and I'm on to the Rocket Fuel book.
Nice. Are you an early morning person or a late night person?
Definitely early morning. My wife is the opposite. She's definitely a late night person. So
Nice. Are you the detailed planner or the more spontaneous, let's figure it out on the go person?
definitely the planner.
Cool. Would you prefer a coffee chat or a lunch meetup?
Coffee.
Cool. Are you the small city or big city person?
I like living in so I'm in Franklin. I like living in a smaller city. But big cities are fun to visit, and there's so much to do. Like, in New York, I went to Chicago a couple weeks ago. So I do like to experience the food and the sights, but if for a place to live, definitely small city or small town.
And a final one. Are you a coffee person or a tea person?
100% coffee person. Well,
okay.
Actually, no, I'll take that back, because I do like iced tea. So it's either hot coffee or iced tea.
Nice. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much. This has definitely been a fun experience learning from your own journey, and really, really seeing how you have been able to navigate your own journey in an effective way that continues to provide key lessons for young professionals, senior leaders, no matter what phase of their journey they are on. And I'm walking away with big takeaways. One is that it's okay when the original dream changes. Second is that leadership sometimes looks like you raising your hand and asking for help. Another is that it's important to be able to know that your environment will go a long way to shape the kinds of experiences that you have, and how you will choose to respond to those experiences is dependent on you. Perspective matters, like you said. So, for everyone listening, whether you're a prospective student, a current student, a professional, a working professional, your story really provides that strong reminder that leadership isn't linear. It's shaped by resilience, it's shaped by self-awareness, and indeed a commitment and willingness to ask for help. So thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today and for sharing your wonderful experience with us.
Thank you.